Hello, this is your host, Paul Harvey at Life, Passion and Business. I realise I put this at the end of the programme most of the time, and I also realise I don't often listen to the end of podcasts. So I thought I'd tell you here before we get started. So the first thing is this podcast is not supported in any way. We have no sponsorship. So if you would like to support us, do check out the Buy Me a Coffee link on this podcast app, and you'll also find it at the website. Okay, before I take you to the podcast, I want to give you a little bit of a reminder about the power of focus and accountability. This is the one tool that will really get you towards the goals you are seeking, towards the path you want to take. So listen to the end to find out more, or check out the link in the show notes. Anyway, let's get you back to the podcast. My name is Paul Harvey, and you are listening to Life, Passion and Business, a podcast born out of my desire to find greater meaning in life at the time when I thought there was none. Since that day, I have spoken to hundreds of people, and what I have discovered is that our story is everything. Because what we do, feel or experience is based on the stories that we tell ourselves. It's time to explore what it means to live a good life. How do we make this experience better? And more importantly, how do we lead the world to a better place?
I've enjoyed being a leader because I feel like when I'm involved in something and I have a leadership role, I can actually make a difference and make an impact. And I'm not the type of person who just like dabbles. But if I dabble in something and I do care for it, then I figure out a way to kind of get really involved or make it like a meaningful, important part of my life.
My guest on the show inspires me on at least 2, could even be 3 counts, because she's an athlete, a novelist and a regenerative farmer. As an only child, Jeanne Blasberg spent a lot of time alone. Her parents gave her lots of independence, and she credits this time with igniting her love for storytelling and nurturing her creativity. To this day, she can still juggle and do close-up magic. Heading to college, she went for the humanities with American studies, so you would never have guessed she would end up on Wall Street as a baby banker. That means the grunt work for the banking industry. Well, it served her well in her writing, in her work for non-profit, and now in her work as a regenerative farmer. Now, banking in the 1980s was a volatile business, so when the job opportunity came up in the same city as her husband's career move, it was worth taking, even if it did mean a move to Sinsinattie. It was a bit of a jump from New York, but her timing was good, as the bank she left was taken over and effectively closed. But that new job brought with it challenge and opportunities that would be manifest in the future. After her first child, the family moved back to Boston, and the skills from that job led her to writing case studies for the Harvard Business School. So now a full-time mum, writing case studies, she was competing in athletics, working in non-profits and holding the chair of US Squash. Yeah, that is the governing body for squash in the USA. Somewhere in that list she found time for reading and exploring her creativity in writing groups, and the ideas for her first novel arrived. Do you know, this is a lovely conversation with a woman who is a polymath and can turn her attention to almost anything and make it happen. She's a deep thinker and has so much to offer in the terms of tools for living a good life. We cover all of the usual questions, and particularly why, when most people are looking to retire, she and her husband have effectively gone back to school to learn how to work the land. And she's clearly passionate about wellness, the food system and the healing aspects of nature, because it inspires her writing. So just 18 months back, they bought 420 acres of a regenerative farm in southwest Wisconsin called the Flying Creek Farm. Earlier this year, she released her 3rd novel, The Daughters of Promise. She co-chairs the Boston Book Festival and serves as an executive committee of Grub Street, a preeminent creative writing centre in Boston. And of course, she's the CEO of Flying Creek Farm. So let's join the conversation with Jeanne Blasberg.
Paul, thanks so much for having me. I am in the state of Wisconsin in the United States, in the southwestern corner of the state known as the Driftless. Got that name because this place was missed in the last ice age. So it's the glacial kind of shaving and flattening that you associate with most of the Midwest, the long stretches of flat cornfields. It's been missed in this little corner of North America. There are these great sandstone rock formations and rolling hills and rivers and lakes. It's quite a special place.
Right. So have you always lived there? I mean, where did it all begin for you? This is always an interesting
No,
question. Where did you come from?
I'm your typical American nomad. I've lived in so many places, and I've only been here in Wisconsin for almost, I guess, a year and a half or 2 years. My husband and I bought a farm, and we're here on this farm in Wisconsin, and we'll probably get into that further in the podcast. But where did it all begin for me? I started out in the New York area. My family moved to California when I was in high school. I really, even though I only lived in Southern California 4 years, they were very formative high school years, and I went to Massachusetts for college. So kind of back and forth across the US. Met my husband. We lived in Ohio. We lived in Boston and in Switzerland. And during COVID, our kids were at an age where we decided they were launched and kind of not coming home as much, and our parents either passed or didn't need us as much, and we decided to make a big change. But yeah, we've lived a lot of places.
Interesting. So early years, what were they like for you? What was your passions in your early years? What were you interested in?
Early years as in like
Childhood, yeah.
childhood. Yeah. So my early years, I think, can really be defined as being an only child of two parents who were quite young. And as a result, for better or worse, they weren't very well equipped to be parents, and they'd kind of set me off to play by myself and say, just don't get hit by a car type of thing. So I had a lot of independence. I also spent a lot of time alone when I couldn't find friends to play with, and developed quite an imagination. To this day, I can juggle and do magic tricks. And my husband's like, where did you learn to do that? And I said, this is what happens when you're an only child. You learn a lot of solitary activities and you kind of perfect them. So I guess my imagination, I bring it up because I do love to write, and I am an author, and I did start writing stories and creating story with my dolls and my toys from a very young age. I also had an interest in science. I was quite good in school. But, as the years went on, and this might be the case with, I don't know, I'm not going to make it gender specific, but you have one bad grade in a class and you decide I am not good at science anymore, and kind of veered all my study towards the humanities. And so when I was in college, I studied, I was an American Studies major, which is basically a conglomeration of history and, a lot of social developments around like what is American, whether it was architecture or art or literature or history. And so it was a really cool kind of leave all your doors open type of major, but it was your quintessential liberal arts major.
What was the interest in that for you? What attracted you to that?
Not really being able to make up my mind. And also, I guess, I went home for vacation once and my father said something like, I had friends who were American Studies majors, and that seems like an interesting major. And so I had been kind of leaning towards the art history, but I decided, and what I really did love was an American Studies major focusing in American art and architecture. And I had the privilege of being able to help design and build a home for my family back in 2012, which really encapsulated this shingle style architecture, which is quintessentially kind of this American New England Northeast style of architecture. So that was really fun.
Is it wooden shingles?
Yeah, it's this grayed out. I mean, it's not just American, but on a lot of these summer communities in New England and on the East Coast, it's a type of architecture that kind of speaks to the moneyed leisure class, and it's code for summertime and big lawns and family gatherings. And my first book, Eden, was set in such a town. I was a newcomer to a place just like that. And so the architecture is just part of the vernacular of kind of, on a farm, you expect to see a red barn and a silo. And in some of these towns, you just expect to see all these grayed out houses.
So you obviously went, you did university or college, as you would call it, and where did that lead you afterwards?
Crazy. After all that studying of art and architecture, I landed on Wall Street and was a baby banker at the age of 21, knowing absolutely nothing. But I got hired.
How did they let you in?
I know. Well, this is crazy. So back in the 80s, and still today, but at where I went to college, Smith College, it's an all women's college, and it's a pretty rigorous, well-known college. And it was the type of place where corporate recruiters would come and interview people senior year for jobs in consulting or investment banking. So these investment banks on Wall Street have analyst training programs that would employ, between 20 and 100 new hires and put them through a training program to the extent they didn't know what they needed to know yet. And then you were the number crunchers. This is back in the day before AI. We did all the proofreading. We did all of the late night running of the numbers for deals. We did all of the arranging of the closings, and it was just the grunt work, but it was notorious, and it was kind of a rite of passage in a way. It was back in the day before people demanded like safe spaces to work, and you were working 100 hours a week, but you were making good money for a young kid, and you were living in New York, and it was just sexy and crazy. And, the reason I think I got hired is because I interviewed really well. I had great summer job experience. I was in sales, and I showed a lot of tenacity and did well in sales. And then also I was a leader on campus and a captain of my sports teams. I captained field hockey and lacrosse and played squash. So it's kind of that stereotypical mindset. They were looking for somebody who had endurance, who had stamina, who was a leader, who was strong. It wasn't necessarily that they needed someone who was good at what they did. As long as I had good grades and they knew I was smart, they were convinced they could mold you into what they wanted you to be. And actually,
did they mold you?
Oh yeah, I can still. I was so in deep. I dreamt about spreadsheets. I was trapped in spreadsheets every night in my dreams, and I worked, and I learned so much. I mean, I really did learn so much. To this day, I can impress people with my acumen on modeling a situation in a spreadsheet, and that's been really helpful, actually, as I've continued with all sorts of pursuits, whether it's sitting on nonprofit boards and acting as the treasurer, or whether it's now running my farm. And that person I was in that investment banking training program was so instrumental in informing this latest character I wrote in my latest novel, Daughter of a Promise. I said, I need to have a character who's in up to her eyeballs in work that she's a little panicked she's not going to do correctly. And that feeling of overwhelm and vulnerability really is a great characteristics for somebody, because you're then at a vulnerable stage where you might say yes to some things you typically wouldn't. Or anyway, it's that feeling of I kind of need help. I need a mentor. I need something. And so having a character with that desire or that vulnerability was something I really wanted to write, and I loved writing this character.
So how did you get from banking to writing? Because there seems to be a gap in there somewhere.
I know. I'm not that young. I've had a long life. So the journey is just that. I ended up on Wall Street. a client of my of the firm I worked at was victim of a hostile takeover. And it was a big department store company located in Cincinnati. So my husband graduated from business school and went to work at Procter and Gamble, which is in Cincinnati. And I got a job at this retailer, this big department store company, after it had been taken over and loaded with debt. And I was working there in the Treasury Department and Strategic Planning Department.
Did you willingly move out of a secure banking job into a company like this? Is this a willing?
Well, can I tell you, nothing's secure. Things were crashing and going crazy in the late 80s. So actually, the whole company I worked for got swallowed up by Credit Suisse, and most of the people I worked with lost their jobs. So, you think my husband was like, let's get married and move to Cincinnati. And for those in Scotland who don't know the difference between New York City and Cincinnati, it's like somebody asking you to marry them and move to Jupiter. I'm not even going to say Mars. It's like so far beyond.
Yeah, I imagine New York is the hit place to be. Everyone recognizes, but Cincinnati,
everybody wants to start it out, right?
Yeah.
But something about being on our own, having no family or friends in a new place, and being in a smaller city that was more affordable, it really was the perfect place for us to start our relationship. But back to how I became a writer. And this is kind of an irrelevant point. So in this job, this big department store company, we owned a lot of chains. And then part of the plan, then we had to declare bankruptcy because of all the debt that had been loaded on. And part of the plan to come out of bankruptcy was to sell off a bunch of locations, but to buy the big conglomerate Macy's and then also buy some other regional retailers. So my job was to really become an expert on every retailer in every city and who was in what malls and what we could sell and what we could buy. And as a result, I became, for a point in time, really well-versed in this world. And so we decided to move back to Boston, closer to family, as we had our first child. And there was a professor of retailing at Harvard Business School who I was introduced to. And we got into such a great conversation because of all of my knowledge of all these stores and everything that was going on. And he said, I know you've just moved here and you've got young children, but would you ever consider working for me as a research associate? And at Harvard Business School, all the cases are taught in the case study method, which is like a 2,000-word written document that the students study from, and we create a situation. We set up a business situation. It's a real business with a protagonist and a issue, and then we leave it kind of open. It's very formulaic so that the students can then use it as topics for discussion in class. So I started writing these case studies and I loved it. It was something I can do in the evening. It was something that was really intellectual, and I worked with this brilliant professor, and he was a great editor and critiquer of my work. And together we published over a dozen case studies. And some of my case studies are actually, people come up to me and they've recently used them. There's one on JCPenney that I don't even think JCPenney is in business anymore, but it was great, and I was really proud of them. And then after that, so I had 3 children, and the professor was retiring. So we kind of, after 4 years, were like, has been a great run. You're retiring. I've now got 3 kids, and I literally need to sleep at night. So, but I was like, this writing gig is what I want to continue doing. And I refer back to what I said earlier with my love of story, my love of my active imagination. I had taken several writing classes in college, so it's not like it just kind of came out of the blue. I really do like to construct a story and to write and to express myself that way. So living in downtown Boston, I just continued to take writing classes at night. When I had a babysitter, I would go to the extension school at Harvard or the Cambridge School for Adult Education. There were so many great educational opportunities, and I studied journalism and poetry and essay writing. And I just really landed on the personal essay. And in the many years I took a class with a wonderful woman named Mopsy Kennedy, I realized I was coming back to the same themes again and again in my life around parental relationships, grandparental relationships, what we inherit unknowingly, what we inherit willingly, what we pass down to our kids, what's unsaid but really known in a family, what are our burdens, and it all was intergenerational. And I just was like, I really want to write a novel. I want to create a family. I don't want to write about my own experience, although my own experience will obviously inform these families and these characters. But I really want to create a family and write fiction and explore some of these issues. I really feel it was a real passion. So I turned my attention to novel writing. This was a time when I was a full-time at-home mom, and I was also competing in athletics, and I was actually the chair of U.S. Squash, which is our national governing body for the sport of squash. And I was doing a lot of nonprofit things, but I was.
So you were still a leader in your world.
Yeah. So I feel like, so that's how the writing came to be.
Yeah.
It really fit in with all of the things I wanted to do. Plus, Paul, I think anybody out there who's a big reader and loves to read and loves the art of the novel or memoir has wondered from time to time, I have a story. I wonder if I could express it this well. And I don't know if I'll ever be able to emulate the highest form of the art. My first novel took like 12 years to write and kind of get it to a stage where I was really happy with it and it was able to be published. But I just became obsessed with writing. And then obviously the writing community in Boston became a group of people, and kind of with the events and the classes I took, but also going to readings and parties with fellow authors, it just it became more than a vocation. It was a lifestyle, and it became my community and my group of friends.
And so you all encourage each other to get the book written, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. We commiserate, we encourage, we, act intellectual and go to book fairs. And it was just, it was like a really cool, and it still continues to be, although it's a little more remote for me now because I'm not living in Boston anymore. Although I am co-chairing the Boston Book Festival, and I'm on the board of a major writing center still in Boston. It just became my thing.
So when did your first book get published?
It got published in 2017. It's called Eden. I was 52. It was followed by a book called The Nine in 2019, which I had actually been writing for a very long time, but just on the side. And then I was able to kind of work on it and get it out 2 years later. I mean, 2 years sounds like a long time, but in the publishing world, that was pretty fast. And then 2024, just this past April, my third book came out. So I'd say 5 or 6 years is about my average speed for.
Are they coming out with a publisher, or are you self-publishing?
Oh, yes. A small publisher here in the U.S. called She Writes Press. It's located in Berkeley, California.
Because I noticed that the industry has really shifted over the last few years. Because 20 years ago, I worked in the industry, in the periphery of the industry. And books was one of the things I was involved in a little bit. And at that time, publishers, it was all about the publisher. But I've noticed since Amazon turned up on the scene, most people will self-publish. Getting a publisher is even harder. And even then, people that I know who have been published say it's just a name; they don't do anything for you.
Well, we could have a whole hour on the evolution and disappointments in the publishing industry and in general, but my publishing journey definitely came with so much rejection that a normal person would have hung it up. I think my experience as an athlete and as a squash player, many people know you lose many more matches and suffer many more losses than you ever win. I mean, if you're just like an average athlete, and yet you love it for the times you do play well and execute a plan. I'm not even saying to win. I'm just saying when you play well and execute a plan feels good. And to train and know that the bad days are kind of your learning opportunities. I think I was able to translate that into what rejection felt like, or what constructive criticism felt like on the artistic side. And I did find a publisher. So She Writes Press, and I had an agent who actually was very favorable for She Writes Press. It's not a traditional press. It's a press where the authors and the publisher are kind of business partners. So once your manuscript gets accepted by them, they make an investment, and then the author also makes an investment basically in terms of the inventory and deciding on what the print run is going to be. But She Writes Press has traditional distribution. Actually, it's distributed now through Simon & Schuster. So you end up everywhere books are sold, but the publisher is taking much less of a risk because you've made an investment yourself, and their business model is completely different. They're able to then publish brand new first-time names who don't have a celebrity coming with them and don't have necessarily a huge platform. But as the name sounds, She Writes Press, it's primarily female voices, and it's I wouldn't say it's a feminist press, but it does have a mission of helping women get their stories out that may not be the type of story a traditional press would be willing to take a risk on.
So how did it feel when your first book was published?
Oh my gosh, Paul, I don't know. It was probably the process of talking about my book and having it out in the world and connecting with readers. It's probably one of the most meaningful and satisfying experiences. I thought maybe if 100 people read this book, wouldn't that be exciting? But it was just so well received, and it was actually picked up in Germany and in France and translated, and it just was incredible that these characters and this story I created in my head was then in other people's heads. I would be invited to book clubs, and there's a character that people often would debate about. She was kind of the grandmother in the year 2000, but the book tells the story of when she was a young woman, and there was she had a drunken night and a sexual experience that in today's world is definitely called rape. But in her world, she kind of thought it was her fault because she got out of control and doesn't remember what happened. Anyway, that scene in which that sexual encounter happens is the cause of so much debate in so many book clubs and in so many living rooms. And sometimes I would be sitting there thinking, I frigging made this stuff up, and people are like arguing about it now. And I just thought that was insane. It's not that I made up the issue, but certain things about the scene and the character. So it was incredible. But I remember the day the book came out, I was so excited leading up to everything, and a lot of work on the book tour and the pre-publicity and all the advertising and marketing materials. And when the actual day came, when I knew my friends and family would be able to buy the book, like I literally couldn't get out of bed. I was riddled with fear. And a friend of mine who had been helping me with different aspects of this process called me at 7 a.m, and she goes, I know you are in bed and you don't want to get out of bed. You have to get out of bed and let's get going. Let's start. And it's almost like be careful what you wish for, because you really want your book to get published and out in the world. But there's no way to prepare someone for how exposed and vulnerable you feel in that moment. And so yes, everything I write and everything I do consider to publish, I am so, like, my standards are so high, as should anybody's, because you do know you are opening yourself up for everybody's point of view, and people are very honest with what they think, and that's fine. And my book doesn't need to appeal to everyone, but you have to be ready to hear everything.
Well, absolutely. I mean, it can't, can it? Every book has its market. That's how it works. And yeah, but I mean, book critics, to me, the whole thing seems a bit crazy to me. If you don't like the book, you don't like the book. Why would there be a critic for it? It's like,
I know I know people like to read and review books on different platforms, but and I haven't gotten many terrible reviews. I mean, I've gotten some, but in my head, I think if you really weren't enjoying it, why didn't you just put it down? Why did you feel the need to finish it and then like go on a platform and
yeah,
completely blast it? And
and
maybe
then
it wasn't your thing.
and share your wisdom of hating the book, even though you carried on reading it. Yes, it does seem a bit strange, doesn't it? Really, unless you're paid to be a reviewer, it does seem a bit weird, really.
Exactly. Exactly.
So, full-time mum and author. Did you and you mentioned you built a house as well, or designed a house. There's obviously quite a lot of things going on in your life.
I know. I feel like, maybe this only childhood with parents in a slightly dysfunctional situation. I was always like the face of being the overachieving type A personality to kind of prove to the public that all was fine. And I do continue to have that need to sort of overachieve and overdo. I think now at 58, I'm kind of settling into a couple of things that really feel good to me. And I don't need the public thing as much. But then again, here I am on your podcast. So I definitely would say I do a lot, but it's probably a character flaw in some ways. Um, we,
Well, we'll come to this because
yeah.
we can explore that in a bit. I mean, so what's been driving you through all these years? What's been the passion, the overriding thing that's always come back to you?
I've looked at that and I do think there's something about creating things and building things
Hmm.
and having a sense of leaving something behind or creating something that might be permanent and like represent stability or represent, I don't know, uh, accomplishment isn't really the right word, but I guess I kind of think if I'm going to do something and I care about it, I want to see if I can like make a real difference and do it at a high level or at 100%. Like, so for example, I played a lot of squash, but in my first experiences in the squash leagues I played in, I didn't think they were very well run. So the next thing you know, I'm running the squash leagues and then I'm like the president of the state association. And then the next thing you know, they've asked me to be on the board of the national. And I thought this could do a lot better than it's doing as well. And I just kind of envision what I would do. And the next thing you know, I'm running the whole thing. And I am a committed person. I guess I've been told I don't hold back. I say what's on my mind. I am sometimes not very political in what I say, but I often raise issues that other people might be thinking, or they just don't say them because, the one who speaks up usually gets tasked with fixing the problems. Anyway, I've enjoyed being a leader because I feel like when I'm involved in something and I have a leadership role, I can actually make a difference and make an impact. And I'm not the type of person who just like dabbles. If I dabble in something and I don't care for it, then I might just give it up. But if I dabble in something and I do care for it, then I figure out a way to kind of get really involved or make it like a meaningful, important part of my life. And so in some ways I'm a black and white person. And that's not always good either. But The situation with building the house was the summer community that we lived in. We had been living with my father in the summer times in his house, and my kids were becoming teenagers. And around that time, we also moved to Switzerland for my husband's job. And so we'd just visit Rhode Island in this town for a couple weeks in the summer. And as the assignment in Switzerland was winding down and we were considering moving back to the United States, my kids were older, they were more active. My father had gotten remarried. And so we found a piece of land and started our building project. And it was really an amazing experience, creating something that would be just for our family and the way we wanted to live. And also it was not just the way we wanted to live, like in your one and only home. It was the luxury of knowing this is the way we want to live in our summer home, which gives you this license to do a few more daring things than if it had been a home for like living day to day and raising
the
kids.
biggest challenge about building a home is that if you're a person that doesn't do decisions well, you're gonna struggle because you have thousands of decisions to make, thousands, and each decision will impact the next one down the line. And in decisions that you made at the beginning can really muck you up at the end. So, yes.
So for better or worse, I'm the type of person who makes decisions really quickly.
Yeah.
I guess I have like a file of stored like aesthetic preferences in my head, but I also don't like to overanalyze certain decisions. And the building site that we chose came with a lot of limitations. In a way that was good because we had to just go with what certain regulations would allow us to do. And so in terms of the shape and the siting of the house, we had very few decisions to make. But I've been told I'm a great client for anybody like an architect because I do make decisions quickly. Now here operating the farm and working with a team, I have this propensity to want to be like, okay, we're going to do this. We figured this out. Let's move on. And, you know, when you're working with a team, making executive decisions isn't really a good quality. So it's slowing down here and getting buy-in and collaboration. And obviously I need that because the folks I'm teaming up with know a lot more about farming than I do. But I'm approaching a lot of my responsibility on the farm with that woman who built a house because I am now putting in infrastructure and working with contractors and putting in solar energy and renovating a farm and building a greenhouse and designing an event space. And so I'm that job of building that house, that again taught me skills to manage future construction.
And you're still using
projects.
spreadsheets.
Lots of spreadsheets, lots of budget.
So, I mean, you mentioned the farm briefly at the beginning of the conversation. So, how did that come about, and what's the objective of it for you? Because you're not young people to buy a farm.
I know, but I feel in my head like I'm still 25,
Okay.
and that has been even amplified more by starting a new venture and starting a brand new stage in our lives. Okay, so I referred to raising our kids in Boston. My kids are now in their late 20s and early 30s. They all live and are very independent, and they're living outside of Boston and showed no interest in returning. My in-laws, who lived around the corner from us and who we took care of towards the end of their life, passed. And my husband and I were looking at each other during COVID just with horror about the food insecurity in this country, in North America, in the United States. There were all sorts of supply chain issues. It was hard to get food. It was hard to get produce. Farms were going under. Restaurants weren't operating. And so my husband's job as a consultant, he had worked on advising a lot of big food companies and actually a lot of the packaged food companies that sell things in the grocery store that are processed and not the healthiest thing in the world. I was also like at this stage where I was like, I love this novel writing, but I feel like we're the type of people, like, we should be doing something about the problems we see. We shouldn't be like cruising into our empty nest years trying to find pickleball games. And like, it just felt ridiculous with all of the crises around us, whether it was the environment and the terrible forest fires and smoke. And anyway, it felt like one way to tackle both the issues around the environment and the issues around health and wellness in our country and accessibility to healthy food could kind of be drilled down to one element, which is the topsoil. And we thought, we're not AI, high-tech, Silicon Valley people, but we do understand intuitively and innately how important the earth is and the earth in which you grow the food, that you should have soil that's healthy, filled with microbiomes and not layered with pesticides and chemicals. And we should be eating food also that isn't highly sprayed. And so it turned into this search for farmland, and we decided to leave the Northeast because it's a pretty highly educated and affluent part of the country where if people want healthy food, they can find it. And I think, I'm not saying that Wisconsin isn't highly educated and like forward thinking, but it's also like land out here in farmland. We're actually in an agricultural community where we're learning and a part of the people that are in this food system, and we're surrounded by the food system living here. And so it's less diverse than New England. So you could be in a small, like have a small farm, but you'd be kind of surrounded by your regular life there. We've really transplanted and become part of a state that's based on agriculture. And we're learning so much about this issue. We're learning how challenging it is to grow organic. We're learning the issues around making your food affordable and accessible to everybody, because growing veggies is very labor intensive. And another part of what we want to do is have farmers on our team who are paid a decent wage and benefits and, you know, all the things that you would need if you wanted to make a career out of farming. So anyway, how did we get here? It was a bunch of choices that, you know, obviously I've spoken about being able to build a house and living all over the place, and my husband's had a successful career. It kind of felt like we needed to take our resources and see if we could conduct a grand experiment in farming. And so it was crazy. We started telling friends we were looking for farmland, and the next thing you know, it, like, once you put it out there, people who are also interested in some way start to find you. And an old family friend reconnected with us who wanted to leave a job as a chef but stay in the food system, and he really wanted to be a farmer. He got in touch with us. He had a lot of experience in Madison, Wisconsin. He introduced us to a fast casual chain of restaurants in Madison that wanted to be our primary customer and associated with their own farm. So all of a sudden we had a farmer, we had a customer. We thought we had everything we needed. I mean, very naive, obviously. We bought this farm. We're into like our second year of growing, but in a way, the first year of growing was fraught with a drought and a lot of delays in our infrastructure getting built. So this is really our first year, like our first true year of growing and delivering food. But we're continuing to learn so much. But, you know, I really feel like it is a success, and it's going to be a huge success. It's definitely not breaking even right now on my spreadsheets, but if you don't view everything from a completely capitalist point of view, it is already successful. And from a dollars and cents point of view, we do want it to be a positive moneymaker, because we would hope we could get other farms to replicate the style of farming that we are instituting, which is organic and regenerative. So we're combining the grazing of animals and the rehabilitation of the grasses and the soils and creating fertility with growing veggies and growing food
So
for
are you
humans.
circular grazing? Are you moving the cattle around?
Well, right now we have sheep that are grazing, and we have goats that are browsing in the forest, and we are putting in fence this fall to introduce our cattle next year. But the idea, yes, is that they will be moved very intensively from paddock to paddock and rehabilitate the state of the all our pastures. We have 420 acres, which I also didn't realize how much responsibility came with stewarding all these acres. And so managing all of the land we do have, the veggie operation is just a small percentage of what we have. And so there's a lot we're doing with
Water. Water must be one of your things. Water is very important to you.
water, soil. It is very like primal and fundamental of what we're worried about. We're basically worrying about the health of the grass, the soil, and retaining water and carbon.
I mean, that's the thing, isn't it? I mean, all of life has been crunched down to numbers. Going back to your banking world, and what we've done is we've taken all the natural things that humans need and crunched them into a number. And we've done that in housing, we've done that in food, we've done that in everything. And of course, it's coming to a crunch point in
Yeah.
society where should it's a political conversation which we're not going to go down, but should a house over someone's head not be a right for a human to be able to afford a house in some way? And of course, in your country and in my country, it's becoming almost impossible for young people to buy housing.
Really is. I mean, we've got a number of young farmers living on, or not living, but working on this farm who would love to own their own farms.
Yeah.
The cost of land is just prohibitive, and so one
And
thing we're starting to
farm
do
equipment, of
is,
course.
yeah, one thing we're thinking about, because I said we have all this acreage, is having some of our employees work for the land and own the land at the end of the day, as opposed to take all cash compensation. So, at a discount, obviously we'd offer them the land at a discount. But yeah, so the average age of a farmer, and it's probably the same in Europe or the United Kingdom. In the United States, it's 63 years old. We're going to have a lot of land changing hands, and not a lot of young people who can afford to buy the land to be farmers. So that means this land either gets developed into housing, or it goes into the hands of the big conglomerate farmers who are monocropping and spraying and giving us all cancer and immune deficiencies. So sorry, I know that I can't really say things like that without scientific proof, but it's just my speculation that highly sprayed food is killing everyone.
There's enough evidence out there to suggest that perhaps we shouldn't be spraying quite so many of the chemicals that we are spraying, and you can see the insect die-off that we're getting across the world. So it has to be linked to something. And maybe there's a clue here. We kill insects on our crops, and maybe it doesn't stay on the crops. It's like it's not rocket science here, is it really?
No, I know.
We do have to kind of think about how we're doing things differently, but I guess, and it can only be done by people power, people like yourselves who say, one farm at a time, we'll change the policy, we'll do something different.
Exactly. I am not trained as a farmer, but as I mentioned, my role on the farm is a lot of this infrastructure and other management. But also, I do try to speak up. I'm involved with the community here. I speak up at a local level, at a state level with the Farm Bureau and the State House, and I speak up for this movement wherever I go. So we're actually documenting our journey on the farm with a production company called Common Table Creative that's done a lot of filming around the food system. And not that we're going to come out with a documentary, but we do think it's important to journal what's going on. So I'm doing a lot of writing about it, but most people consume story through visual media, and it's a little bit more efficient, and it's also a little more emotional. So we're filming what we're doing. We hope people might want to emulate what we're doing, because even though the way I'm describing it sounds like it's an awful lot to take on, it couldn't be more peaceful and loving and rewarding and healing. So I talk about that wounded girl, now using the word wounded, but the little girl who played alone and juggled and did magic tricks and wanted to be a scientist, but got convinced she was bad at science. Living on a farm is 24 hours a day, a science project. And being with the community here is fun. You know, there's just no two ways about it. It's a fun group of people. And then our land, the expanse of the land and the natural life, being in tune with that and trying to work with it, it's so, it's like medicine for me. I don't know that it would be medicine for everyone. And I joke with my husband that in a past life, I think I ran through the woods foraging for my own dinner. I feel at home on trails, in the woods, on our land, learning birds' names and documenting the birds that are migrating through. We've converted a bunch of land to a pollinator habitat, so kind of cataloging the changes, and just going out for a sunset walk with my dog on a mowed trail through the farm. There's something that just makes me feel like if I could do this for the rest of my life, I never need to go anywhere else. I never need to talk to anyone. I
am so far off my questions at the moment because it's an interesting
anyway.
conversation. I need to get back to them. I just want to draw your attention to something you say about how, documenting it with film is important because it's the one that people consume. I mean, you obviously heard of Top Gear.
Yep.
Right, and you heard of Jeremy Clarkson
and I'm embarrassed to say, like 90% of what I've learned from farming was from Clarkson's.
You watched Clarkson's farm, yeah.
I think if my crew keeps hearing me quoted, and they're very sick of it.
The impact that he has had on UK farming is enormous because before that, most people didn't have a clue how difficult it was, and the fact that the farmer would put a crop into the field and have no knowledge about what he would make at the end of the year. As he said, it's a £50,000 gamble to put wheat in that field.
Isn't it crazy the burden we're putting on people who are growing what we need to survive? In the United States, we watch Clarkson's farm on Amazon Prime. I can stream it, but there was a documentary that came out. It was kind of during COVID. It's one of these things that really impacted our desire to do this. There was a film called The Biggest Little Farm. And then there's an organization called Kiss the Ground that came out with a documentary. I think it was called Kiss the Ground. And their next documentary is called Common Ground. But there have been a number of documentaries probably around the same time period that Clarkson's farm has been filmed, that have illuminated the issue here in the U.S. Not in such a comical, accessible way, maybe in more of a doomsday way. And that's why I really love Clarkson's farm, because of Jeremy's self-deprecating humor. But the group he's assembled as his team, they are so, and then at the end of each season when they kind of sit around and talk about the highs and the lows, that's not far off from how we already feel a year and a half in. The commiserating and feeling like you're in the bunker together. And I don't know if I can swear on your podcast.
Oh, go on. Why not?
Okay, but there's something called a fairy tale, which starts once upon a time. And there's something called a farm tale, which starts, you won't believe this shit. And literally, if you have a day as a farmer when something doesn't break or go wrong, it's actually a great day. And it's so, comforting to know that all over the world, there are people trying to fight these little fights. And I was taking it personally because we're so new at this. This is why so many things are going wrong, but it's actually like this for most farmers. And so again, back to your point of how much of a financial burden and how much risk, and also how much like psychological stress you're putting on your farmers to keep the food system running. And you know, big corporate farms don't have that same sort of stress and financial burden. It's the small individual family farms that are going away. The rate of suicide among farmers is so high because you're gambling so much money. And then you see that rain come and you're just like, oh my God, my crop's going to fail. I'm not going to get the yield. I'm not going to be able to pay the loan off. And it is so heartbreaking that these families who take on this burden for the benefit of our health and our food system, like what they're going through. It's not surprising their kids grow up, leave the farm, and never want to come back.
Interesting problem is, how do you fix it though, isn't it? Because it's like,
it really is.
Because fixing it requires like some kind of a different approach, and which is a whole story in another podcast. And maybe
I know. I think
maybe
our
you and I should have
society.
another conversation about that one or something. I mean, I've got some ideas, but I don't think I've got the time to explore it here. So I'm going to get me back to my questions. Otherwise, we're going to be talking for well over an hour. So clearly, success for you changed over the years. Once upon a time, it was a good spreadsheet, and still a good spreadsheet. But I think your success now is walking in the sunshine, maybe with your dog, or is there more to it?
Yeah, my success is that I have a loving relationship with my husband and a loving relationship with my 3 children, and that we're all very close, and that I think I've created places for us to be together and ways for us to enjoy time together with our children as they're adults. I think my success is in communicating my ideas well with the written word. And my success is in not necessarily whether this farm is in the black or the red right now, but building the team that we have and keeping people on board, even though this feels like a rocky road. So, yeah, I do agree. The simplicity, I'm striving for simplicity in my life. And it means staying in one place a little bit more and not having such a long list of things running through my head. It's really like the present moment. I know that sounds cliche, but I have this habit of sometimes being somewhere, but then like booking my plane ticket for the next place I need to be and already like figuring out the logistics for the next thing when I'm supposed to just be here and figuring out, is the corn in and is this done?
Staying in the present. Staying in the present. Yeah, absolutely.
It's just staying in the present. I think I'm getting increasingly better at it. Mm-hmm. I think I'm blessed so much because I do have a family. And as a mom, I think a lot of your listeners who are parents can understand sometimes you're only as happy as your least happy child. And you spend a lot of time wondering how you might help or what support you might be able to offer, especially as they're in this young adult stage. And I would say I have 3 kids who haven't always, but are figuring stuff out and look like they're just fine. And so I actually think the farm and all of my enterprising out here is making me a person who's not hovering over their kids, but relating to them as a friend and in a healthier way. I'm not, necessarily like counting the days till someone gets married or has a grandchild or starts making my life as filling a new role for me. And I think, in this day and age, people are marrying or not marrying, having kids or not having kids. And so I think society kind of expects women to be fertile, have children, hang out a little bit, then be a grandmother. And so I'm kind of resisting, but also finding this role in this time of my life as being a really rewarding time.
We have to find the role. That is it. You know, parenting is a massive role, particularly for women. And when it passes, and I know a lot of people, I mean, empty nesting hit me quite heavily when my son walked out and left and went on to go to university and stuff. And I found it quite tough when he went because
Absolutely.
we had a very good bond, a very strong bond. I mean, it was the year of COVID when he came back and left the year of COVID, but we had 6 months of cooking together and being together. So when he left, it was a real bereft for me. I mean, he was so excited to get out in the world. I'm going, oh, the best mate's just left.
I think, yeah. So success and anything that would be success
Yeah.
is continuing a very strong, close relationship among my family. And I've had ups and downs as a kid. My mother died of her alcoholism when she was my age. I look at that and I think every day I live right now as a healthy human, like she didn't have that. And I think, God, what a terrible. Anyway, I just want my version of my nuclear family to be supportive. I want us to all support each other. I want us to feel close and honest with each other. I want us to have fun times together. And so, in some ways, at this age, that involves me stepping back and having my own thing.
Yes.
Because I think my kids do really respect that. And they want to spend time with me because they know I'm up to some hijinks and fun and interesting things wherever I am. I'm not dwelling on them as the answer to what my role is. And so I've seen some, yeah, go ahead.
So how do you look after yourself? Let's move us on here because with success is clearly you've got an interesting model for success. So there's this thing about contribution. So contribution is that it goes out into the world, but it also comes back to the self. Your contribution is huge. You've got books, you've got the farm, you've got a mother, all these things that are clearly your contribution in the world, and they go on because you serve on with the squash and things. So there's no doubt about it that you're contributing. You're leaving a legacy behind. How are you looking after yourself? How are you contributing to yourself?
Well, great question, Paul. I don't think I have a problem looking after myself. I do like to be alone a good amount. I'm used to it. I'm used to like having a very active life in my head. So I do think I need, I dedicate a certain amount of day each day to kind of a morning ritual and journaling and like self-reflection and some meditation. And that's become a permanent part of my morning routine, so much so that I often will refuse invitations that have involved me like having to get up and get out of the house too early in the morning. I really do like the way I start every day. Also, as a recovering squash player and athlete, I've enjoyed like the habit of exercise, and that's usually a afternoon kind of reward for getting up from the desk and having put in some writing time. I will always exercise every day, whether it's a long walk with my dog or it's something with a little bit more cardio. I like to swim and cycle. I still play squash on occasion with my kids and my husband, but I'm not competing as much, and I think that that's hard on my body. I also spend time in nature. When I'm not on the farm, I'm an avid skier in the winter time, so being in the snow and the cold and the high altitude is something that actually really agrees with me, and I enjoy both the exhilaration of skiing and also the aggressiveness with which I ski. I sometimes I swallow a little dose of fear every day, and I just really love the mountains, and especially in wintertime. So even like my husband was talking about inviting some friends next January to come to our home in Utah. And I said, sweetie, let's be very clear. That is my month. That is my time. If somebody's getting invited, they have to check a lot of boxes for me. So I can be kind of demanding about protecting what is my time and what is my sacred thing. I do not have a problem. Like, some people are too giving of themselves and don't protect their private time. I am very vocal about needing certain things, and almost too vocal sometimes. If a day isn't going right, I'll just say, I just need my time. I just need my me time. I'm done. I'm done with being around people. I'm going into my turtle shell, and I'm doing what I want.
But that is the point. This body, this
know.
life is for us. It's our life.
That's right.
And
I think, when I said to a whole group of my friends in Boston, I'm kind of holding up the tent and I'm done with this chapter. People were like, "What? You can't do that. We're friends. We've known each other forever." And I'm like, "Well, we're friends. We can still be friends and we'll still be in touch, but I'm kind of done. I'm out of here. I'm selling this house. We sold our home in Boston that we raised our kids in order to finance buying this farm." And it was like really cool, but I think we offended some people. And again, it's your life, and sometimes you have to do and say things that some people may take personally. But on the other hand, that's their issue. I think a lot more people look up to the fact that we actually are just doing what we want to do, and we're not living some version of a life that is like expected.
the thing about offense, it has to be taken. There have to be, to be offended, you have to be willing to be offended. You have to decide to be offended to be that way, because it's the choice.
That's a really good point, because one of the principles I try to live by is by not taking things personally.
Yeah.
If people were making decisions about their lives because of that's a very egotistical point of view, is to be offended or to take things personally. It has nothing to do with me. Just like my move here has nothing to do with my friends in Boston. It just has to do with how I want to spend my time.
So what's it all for then? What's life for? We touched on this thing about the fact that we financialize everything in life. We financialize food, we financialize property, we financialize land. End of the day, land doesn't belong to you. Someone at the beginning stole the land in the first place because it belonged to no one. And yet we have this whole structure around land belongs to people.
Right.
So like, what's it all for? What's the whole purpose of life for you?
What's the whole purpose of life? Oh my gosh, I didn't know I was going to be asked this question. The purpose of life.
It's meaning. It's the God question or the no God question. It's.
Well, I think if I take it back to I do think it has to do with love and living a life based, like, letting go of fear and knowing that we came from love, and our job is to kind of express love and to assume people have good intentions and to approach people with a loving attitude. I mean, I think everything that has come about in this world and in my life in particular comes from relationships, not just my close, my immediate family who I obviously love, but approaching a business meeting, assuming that kindness and an attitude of love and like accepting and openness is going to get us further than not. So in the end, I think it all comes down to how we relate to other people and our ability to communicate in a positive, like, forward thinking way. And I guess we're all humans living an experiment that puts us in situations where we have the opportunity to either be trusting and loving and forward thinking and open, or we have an opportunity to be more like suspicious and protective and closed-minded. And so, I guess introducing diversity and a variety of experiences into your life, whether you can afford to physically be all over the place or whether you just do it from reading books and listening to other people's experiences or trying to consume information, the development of that empathy muscle and that ability to be more loving. I think at the end of the day, if people remember me as someone who didn't just like accomplish these things with force, but with a sense of like love and happiness and collaboration, that would be success. I'm definitely have room for improvement there, but I do think that that's the road I'm on.
Mm-hmm. So meaning, love, I think it's a nice one. That's a good one. So we're coming to our end of our time together, Jeannie. What do you want to leave people with? What is it you want to say as a ending or closing?
Well, Paul, I think you might have said it. We only get one turnaround on this world. And if there's something big that you'd like to do, or something that's just different than what you're doing right now, you can start taking small steps towards that change. It's never easy, but we weren't put here to do something easy. I think we were put here to do something that we feel that would make us feel proud of our lives. And so whatever that is, just think about how you might do it. All of the most satisfying things I've done, including like these books and these kids and my marriage and this farm, I was scared to death before it kind of all started happening. And now I wouldn't change a thing. So
if people would like to connect with you, can they do so? How would they do so?
Absolutely. I've got a website called JeanneBlasberg.com. It's got links to my books, my essay writing, and all my social media. I'm pretty active on Instagram under Jeanne Blasberg Author. But again, JeanneBlasberg.com connects me to just about everything I do.
Fantastic. Well, all those links will be available at the website lifepassionbusiness.com and on the show notes of this podcast. Jeanne Blasberg, thank you so much for being with me today. I really, really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul, and thanks to all your listeners.
All the best. And that was Life, Passion and Business with your host, Paul Harvey, and my guest, Jeanne Blasberg. Now, if you'd like to connect with Jeanne, you can find her at jeanneblasberg.com. She's on Instagram, Jeanne Blasberg Author, on Facebook, Jeanne Blasberg Author, and she has a Substack, which is jeanneblasbergsubstack.com. All those links will be available at the website lifepassionandbusiness.com. Do check her out because she is an amazing lady. Okay, as I mentioned at the beginning, now is a time to discover how to find some more focus in your life and get things done. Okay, so we're all looking to move forward. We all want to find some measure of success in the world. And if you've heard the podcast, you know I have a view of success, but that's another conversation. But the point is, however you look at this, we want to get things done. You might want to get a project over the line. You might have a really big goal that you're looking to move forward on. And the problem is, whenever we start these projects, whenever we do anything like this, there's always some resistance. There's always something that gets in the way. And that can be a multitude of things. But the key to this is, how do we retain focus and stay with the project and push it over the line? And that's where focus coaching can help. Now, it's a process that I discovered some 15 years ago during my coach training, and it's something sometimes called focus coaching, turbo coaching, speed coaching, and it's a really simple process where we define what it is you're trying to achieve, and we look at the resistance that you're experiencing in that achievement, come up with some strategies to solve that resistance, commit to setting a date, and I hold your feet to the fire to make sure that you do that. So there's a commitment, there's an accountability process, and that's it. That's basically how it works. You get it done. And I can tell you, it is so powerful when you start working in this way, particularly when you work with someone who supports you in the process of doing it. And one thing to remember, success is never guaranteed, but the struggle always is. And that's what this coaching is designed to do. It's designed to get you through the struggle towards the success you're looking for. So do check out the link on this podcast, or at the website lifepassionandbusiness.com. You will find a video of me again explaining this process. But if you go below the video, there's a booking link where we'll have a discussion about your project and how we could get you sorted. As always, if you have enjoyed this podcast, if you found anything here of any use, please share it with a friend, because that's how people like yourself find good podcasts. If you can, give us a review. Give us a 5-star review. I have to ask for 5 stars. Why not? I think I'm worth it. When you support a podcast in that way, you have no idea how effective it is, both in terms of supporting us on the platform, but it also makes us feel good. Yes, it makes me feel good, and I like to feel good. As always, thank you for your time and attention. I will catch you next time.